The sunlight, a golden cascade, poured through the large bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and settling gently on the polished antique furniture. It was a perfect autumn afternoon, captured forever in a single vibrant photograph. The image depicted a scene of pure, unadulterated joy. The Miller family surrounded by an assortment of aunts, uncles, and cousins, all beaming, their laughter almost audible through the glossy print. Sarah, her usually neat blonde hair slightly disheveled from an afternoon of chasing after her children, stood proudly at the center, a wide, genuine smile gracing her lips. Beside her, Tom, her ever-practical husband, had his arm wrapped around her waist, a rare, relaxed grin softening his typically serious expression. Their two children, Lily and Ethan, were a blur of happy motion in the foreground, Lily's bright red bow askew and Ethan's dimpled cheeks flushed with excitement. The entire frame vibrated with warmth, the scent of Grandma's apple pie seemingly wafting from the paper, the gentle clinking of celebratory glasses echoing faintly in the mind's eye. It was a moment frozen in time, a testament to new beginnings and cherished connections, a picture-perfect memory that promised nothing but happiness. Before we delve deeper into the unsettling truth behind this seemingly idyllic scene, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next captivating story. Your support helps us bring more intriguing narratives to life. This picture, now a focal point of their living room, was a recent addition to the Miller household. The Miller family had only recently moved into their charming, slightly old-fashioned house, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't just any house. It was Sarah's grandmother's home, passed down after she had peacefully departed a few months prior. Sarah, a meticulous mother with a keen eye for detail and an amateur photographer's passion, had poured her heart into making the inherited property their own. Tom, her husband, was the anchor of their family, grounded and pragmatic, often balancing Sarah's more artistic and emotional inclinations. Their children, 7-year-old Lily, a spirited and imaginative girl, and 5-year-old Ethan, a curious and observant boy, had quickly adapted to their new surroundings, finding endless nooks and crannies to explore. The house, with its creaky floorboards and scent of aged wood, held a comforting nostalgia for Sarah, a tangible link to her past, and promised a fresh start for their future. The photograph itself was taken during their very first big family dinner in the new house. It had been a gathering filled with boisterous chatter, overflowing plates, and the joyous reunion of relatives who hadn't seen each other in far too long. Sarah had set up her camera on a tripod, determined to capture the essence of this milestone. It was more than just a family photo. It was meant to be a symbol, a visual anchor for their new chapter, a fresh beginning in a place that held so much personal history. Every smile, every embrace, every shared glance was meant to encapsulate the promise of a happy future within those familiar walls. Days later, the initial rush of moving settled, and the last of the thank you notes were sent. Sarah finally had a moment to properly admire the printed photograph. She held it in her hands, tracing the outlines of her children's faces, reliving the warmth of that evening. Her thumb brushed over the glossy surface, her gaze lingering on the vibrant details. That's when she saw it. Tucked away in the far right corner of the frame, barely visible, partially obscured by the heavy velvet curtain that draped over the window, was the faint outline of a small child. It was only a sliver of a face, a small, pale oval, but the eyes were unmistakable. They were dark, wide, and seemed to be fixed directly on the camera, on her, with an unnerving intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. The child was definitely not one of the guests. Sarah had personally invited everyone, and she knew every child present that evening. No one had been standing there. Certainly not in that particular spot, not even for a fleeting moment. Sarah blinked, shaking her head slightly. It had to be a trick of the light, she reasoned. A peculiar reflection from the window pane, or perhaps a shadow playing optical games. Her mind, usually so rational and organized, immediately sought a logical explanation. Yet, despite her attempts to dismiss it, a small, persistent flicker of unease ignited within her. The child's gaze felt too direct, too deliberate for a mere anomaly. It held a peculiar stillness, an unnatural focus that contradicted the bustling energy of the rest of the photograph. She ran her finger over the spot as if to wipe away the image, but it remained stubbornly imprinted on the paper. A prickle of apprehension began to spread through her, a subtle chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Sarah brought the photograph to Tom, who was engrossed in a technical manual in his study. "Tom," she said, her voice softer than usual, a slight tremor she hoped he wouldn't notice. "Can you look at this?" He took the photo, his brow furrowed in concentration as he scanned it. "What is it, honey? Lily's hair is a mess as usual?" He chuckled, attempting to lighten the mood. "No, look closer," Sarah insisted, pointing a trembling finger towards the corner. "There, in the background. Do you see it?" Tom peered at the spot, his face shifting from amused curiosity to mild perplexity. He tilted the photo, adjusting it under the desk lamp. That's odd," he conceded, his voice losing some of its usual confidence. "It looks like a child? A reflection, maybe? Or just a really strange shadow from the curtain." He tried to rationalize it, just as Sarah had. "The lighting was tricky that day, remember? Lots of glare from the setting sun." He handed the photo back to her, shrugging slightly, but his eyes lingered on the corner for a beat longer than necessary. He attributed it to a shadow or an optical illusion, trying to reassure both her and himself, but even his practical mind couldn't entirely shake the faint sense of something being just a little bit off. The image, once a source of comfort, now held a delicate thread of disquiet, subtly weaving itself into the fabric of their new home. The family portrait, once a symbol of their hopeful new beginning, now rested on the mantelpiece like a silent, unnerving sentinel. Sarah found her gaze drawn to it almost constantly, not to the beaming faces of her husband and children, but to that obscure corner where the child's eyes seemed to bore into her very soul. What had initially been a fleeting disquiet had morphed into a persistent, gnawing unease. Even when her back was turned, a prickling sensation crawled up her spine, an undeniable feeling of being watched, a phantom presence lurking just beyond the edge of her perception. The house, which had once felt cozy and full of warmth, now harbored a subtle chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air seeping through its old windows. Minor, inexplicable occurrences began to ripple through their daily lives, too subtle to be alarming on their own, but cumulatively unsettling. Sarah would place her reading glasses on the bedside table, only to find them moments later on the living room coffee table. A favorite teacup would vanish from the kitchen counter, only to reappear in the pantry. Faint whispers, like the rustle of dry leaves or the sigh of an old house settling, would drift from empty rooms just beyond the threshold of decipherable sound. Doors would creak open on their own, not with a dramatic bang, but with a slow, deliberate groan that suggested an unseen hand. Tom, ever the pragmatist, blamed the house's age, the shifting foundations, the drafts. But Sarah knew deep in her gut that these were not mere quirks of an old structure. They felt like tiny, tentative probes, testing the boundaries of their reality. The children, with their innocent, unfiltered perceptions, were the first to voice what Sarah only felt. One afternoon, Lily came to her, her brow furrowed, with a seriousness unusual for her age. "Mommy," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I saw someone playing in the hallway, a little child, but when I looked, they were gone." Ethan, usually boisterous, reported similar sightings. "I saw a boy, Mom," he'd said, his eyes wide and a little sad. He was hiding behind the curtain like he wanted to play, but he wouldn't come out. They described a strange, lonely feeling that accompanied these fleeting glimpses, a sense of quiet sadness that seemed to permeate the air where the child had been. Sarah's heart ached with a fear she couldn't articulate, a dread that their children were seeing what she only sensed. Tom, however, remained steadfast in his rationalizations. He'd patiently explain away Lily and Ethan's tales as the vivid imagination of children living in a new old house. "It's just shadows, sweetheart," he'd tell Lily, ruffling her hair. "Or maybe you heard the wind," he'd assure Ethan. For the misplaced items, he'd suggest Sarah was simply forgetful, a common side effect of their busy lives. The creaking doors? Just the old wood expanding and contracting, love. Nothing to worry about. His unwavering skepticism, while initially comforting, now felt like a wall between them, a barrier against the escalating sense of dread that consumed Sarah. She felt increasingly isolated in her conviction, yet the feeling grew stronger each day. It was all connected, inextricably linked to the enigmatic child in the photograph. The child's unblinking gaze seemed to mock Tom's logic, a silent challenge from the spectral depths of the image. Desperate to either confirm her fears or more preferably debunk them entirely, Sarah decided to conduct her own investigation. She retrieved the camera she had used that evening, determined to recreate the exact conditions of the photograph. She studied the angle, the lighting, the positioning of the family. Then, with a pounding heart, she stood in the very spot where the child's figure had appeared, behind the heavy velvet curtain in the corner of the dining room. The air there felt noticeably different. Colder than the rest of the room, a damp, heavy chill that seemed to seep into her bones, despite the warmth radiating from the fireplace just a few feet away. She peered into the shadows, mentally replaying the scene. Logically, there was no way a child could have been there, unseen and unheard, during the boisterous family dinner. No guest had brought a child of that age, and certainly no one had been standing so still, so silently, in that obscure corner. She took several photos, adjusting her stance, trying to capture a reflection, a shadow, anything that could explain the image. Each time, the developed photos showed nothing but an empty curtained corner. The cold spot remained, an inexplicable pocket of frigid air, and the mystery of the child's presence deepened, leaving her with no logical explanation, only a chilling void where answers should have been. The futility of her attempt to recreate the scene solidified Sarah's conviction. This was no trick of light or shadow. This was something else entirely. A profound, unsettling fear began to take root, urging her to dig deeper. The house was a century old. It had stories, secrets. She started with what was closest: old family documents her grandmother had left behind, yellowed letters, faded photographs of distant relatives she'd never known, property deeds, and even a few cryptic diary entries that hinted at events long past. She spent hours poring over these brittle papers, searching for any mention of a child, an incident, anything that could shed light on the spectral figure. When the family archives yielded no direct answers, her pursuit broadened. Driven by an urgent, almost obsessive need for understanding, Sarah ventured into the local archives, a dusty, quiet repository of the town's history. She hoped that within those forgotten records she might find a name, a date, a tragedy that would explain the silent, watchful gaze from the corner of their family photo. The thought of what she might uncover sent a shiver down her spine, but the alternative, living with this growing, inexplicable dread, was far more terrifying. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the answers lay buried in the past of this very house, waiting to be unearthed. Sarah's initial forays into the house's history had begun innocently enough: a casual search through dusty boxes of her grandmother's old papers, then a few quiet afternoons at the local historical society. What started as a quest for architectural facts quickly morphed into a chilling excavation of the past. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled as she turned the brittle pages of an old town gazette. There, tucked away in a faded column from decades past, was an article that made her blood run cold. It spoke of a tragedy, a small, somber piece about a young child, Alara, who had died within the very walls of the house she now called home. The details were sparse, shrouded in euphemisms and Victorian-era discretion, but the implication was clear. Alara's life had ended prematurely, and under circumstances veiled in mystery, a quiet horror that had been swept under the rug of time. As Sarah devoured every scrap of information, a profound sense of dread settled in her chest. She found an old, tattered sketchbook among her grandmother's things, filled with childish doodles and a single hauntingly familiar drawing. It was a simple portrait, rendered in charcoal, of a little girl with wide, solemn eyes and a faint, almost shy smile. The drawing, though faded and creased, was an undeniable echo of the child in their family photograph. The same delicate features, the same unsettling intensity in the gaze. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine as she realized the timeline aligned perfectly. Her grandmother had owned the house during the period of Alara's tragic death. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was a connection. A spectral thread weaving through generations from a forgotten child to a modern-day photograph. With each revelation, the strange occurrences within the house intensified, as if Alara's spirit, stirred by Sarah's investigation, was asserting her presence with newfound vigor. What had once been subtle whispers now evolved into distinct, albeit faint sounds of a child's laughter echoing from empty rooms, or a heart-wrenching sob that seemed to emanate from the very floorboards. Objects, previously only misplaced, began to fall from shelves with startling crashes, scattering across the floor. Lights in the living room, where the family photo sat prominently on the mantelpiece, would flicker erratically, sometimes plunging the space into momentary darkness before blazing back to life. The temperature in Alara's old bedroom, now Lily's, would drop dramatically, a chilling pocket of air that made breath visible on even mild evenings, leaving a palpable sense of sorrow and coldness. It was no longer a matter of imagination. The house was actively responding to Sarah's pursuit of the truth. The escalating phenomena began to take a heavy toll on the Miller family. Lily and Ethan, once vibrant and playful, grew increasingly withdrawn. Their innocent chatter was replaced by hushed conversations about a sad girl they saw in their dreams, a child who cried and called out for someone to find her. They described vivid nightmares, not of monsters, but of loneliness, of being lost in endless corridors and forgotten rooms, a silent echo of Alara's probable suffering. The joy that had filled their new home, the promise of a fresh start, had evaporated, replaced by an oppressive atmosphere of tension and unspoken fear. Sarah watched her children, their eyes now shadowed with an understanding far too mature for their years, and her heart ached with guilt and a growing terror. Even Tom, the ever-rational engineer, could no longer dismiss the mounting evidence. His skepticism, once a comforting anchor, had finally fractured under the weight of undeniable, inexplicable events. The falling objects, the drastic temperature shifts, the children's consistent and terrifying accounts. These were not mere quirks of an old house. He had witnessed the lights flicker with his own eyes, felt the icy grip of an unseen presence, and heard the faint, mournful cries that defied logical explanation. The pragmatic man who had once scoffed at Sarah's ghost stories now walked through their home with a wary caution, his gaze constantly sweeping the shadows. The family dynamic, which had been built on laughter and the shared dream of a happy future, had shifted profoundly. They were no longer a family joyfully settling into a new life. They were a unit besieged, bound together by a shared, terrifying secret. And through it all, the family photo remained on the mantelpiece, a silent, powerful observer. The child's gaze, once a curious anomaly, now seemed to follow them with an unnerving intensity. It was no longer merely watchful, it felt almost accusatory, particularly when they discussed Alara, when Sarah shared another chilling detail from her research, or when Tom reluctantly admitted his fear. The eyes in the photograph seemed to bore into their souls, demanding recognition, demanding justice. It was as if the photograph itself was a gateway, a fragile veil between their world and Alara's, and with every passing day the veil grew thinner, allowing more of her restless spirit to bleed through. The cheerful family portrait, meant to symbolize new beginnings, had become a haunting testament to a forgotten tragedy, its smiling faces a stark contrast to the spectral eyes that now held them captive. Sarah, fueled by a potent mix of fear and a burgeoning sense of responsibility, spent countless hours poring over dusty newspaper clippings, brittle town records, and obscure local histories. Each fragmented piece of information was a thread meticulously woven into the tragic tapestry of Alara's life. What she discovered painted a heartbreaking portrait of a quiet, imaginative child, often left to her own devices by parents consumed by their own pursuits. Alara wasn't openly mistreated, but rather profoundly neglected. Her world was largely internal, a vibrant landscape of make-believe nurtured within the confines of their large, old house. Her parents, busy with social engagements and professional obligations, saw her as an easy child content to play alone, never demanding attention. This passive neglect, Sarah realized, was perhaps more cruel than overt abuse, leaving Alara starved for connection and recognition. The official record stated Alara's death was an accident, a tragic fall from a window, but the details were frustratingly sparse and contradictory. Neighbors' testimonies varied, police reports were brief, and the whole affair seemed to have been quickly hushed up, perhaps out of a desire to spare the prominent family further scandal. Yet whispered rumors persisted through the decades, faint echoes in the town's collective memory that Sarah now unearthed. Tales of a hidden room, a secret passage known only to Alara where she would retreat for hours crafting fantastical worlds among her toys and drawings. It was said she considered it her sanctuary, a place where she truly felt seen, even if only by herself. The idea of this secret space, a place of profound solitude and imagination, resonated deeply with Sarah, stirring a fresh wave of empathy for the forgotten child. The possibility that Alara's death was connected to this hidden haven, perhaps even occurring within it, sent a shiver down her spine. As Sarah delved deeper into the fragmented narrative of Alara's brief life, the understanding of the child's persistent presence in their home began to shift. The haunting gaze in the photograph, initially perceived as accusatory or malevolent, now seemed to transform, taking on a new, heart-wrenching meaning. It was not a look of malice, Sarah realized with a pang of sorrow, but a desperate plea. Alara's spirit was not angry in the way one might expect from a vengeful ghost. Rather, she was profoundly restless, adrift in an unfinished narrative. She sought something she had lost, a truth yet to be revealed, a story that had been silenced and forgotten. Her gaze was a silent scream for help, a yearning for recognition, for someone to finally see her, to understand the loneliness and fear that must have defined her final moments. She wasn't trying to harm them. She was trying to communicate, to break free from the invisible chains of her tragic past. It was a plea for closure, a desperate hope that someone, anyone, would finally bear witness to her existence and the injustice of her forgotten end. The weight of this new understanding, coupled with the relentless escalation of the house's strange phenomena, finally forced Tom to confront Sarah directly. His face, usually a mask of calm practicality, was etched with worry and a profound weariness. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and strained, "we can't keep living like this. The kids, they're not themselves. This house is tearing us apart." He suggested the unthinkable, the very antithesis of their initial dream, moving. "We can sell it, cut our losses, find somewhere new, somewhere without this." The words hung heavy in the air, a stark admission of defeat. But Sarah, her heart now inextricably linked to the lonely child in the photograph, shook her head slowly. Her eyes, though shadowed with exhaustion, held a fierce resolve. "We can't, Tom, not yet, don't you see? She's not trying to scare us away, she's trapped. She's asking for help." A profound sense of obligation, an empathy so powerful it transcended the boundaries of life and death, had taken root within her. She saw Alara not as a ghost, but as a lost child, a victim of circumstance and neglect. "We found her story, Tom. We're the only ones who know. We have to help her find peace. We owe her that much." Her conviction was unwavering, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Tom looked at her, then back at the photograph, his initial fear slowly giving way to a reluctant understanding, a nascent flicker of the same compassion that now consumed his wife. Sarah's words, imbued with such raw emotion and conviction, resonated with Tom more deeply than he would have admitted. The idea of leaving Alara's spirit unresolved, of abandoning her to her perpetual loneliness, began to feel like a betrayal. He remembered the faint rumors Sarah had mentioned, the whispers of a hidden room. "A secret passage," he murmured, his engineer's mind already beginning to process the architectural implications. Where would it be? How would we find it? And so a new mission was born, one that transcended their fear and united them against the unknown. The family embarked on a meticulous, almost desperate search. They scoured every inch of the old house, tapping on walls, examining floorboards for any unusual seams or hollow sounds. Tom, with his practical eye, studied the original blueprint Sarah had unearthed, tracing the lines of the house, looking for discrepancies, for any space that didn't quite add up. They checked behind bookshelves, inside old wardrobes, beneath loose floorboards and forgotten corners. Lily and Ethan, sensing the shift in their parents' demeanor from fear to determined purpose, even joined in, their small hands patting walls, their young eyes searching for anything out of place. It was a shared endeavor, a tangible way to confront the intangible, and in their collective effort, a fragile sense of hope began to bloom. The house, once a source of terror, became a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to be overcome, all for the sake of the silent child who watched them from the mantelpiece. As their search intensified, so too did Alara's manifestations, though with a subtle yet profound shift in their nature. They were no longer purely terrifying, but rather took on a more personal, almost playful, yet still deeply unsettling quality. It was as if Alara, sensing their efforts, was responding, guiding them in her own ethereal way. Toys that Lily and Ethan had carefully put away would reappear in unexpected places, sometimes arranged in a small circle, as if awaiting a playmate. A child's handprint, impossibly small and delicate, would materialize on a dusty window pane or the surface of an antique table, only to vanish moments later, leaving behind a lingering chill. The faint whispers were now clearer, sounding less like mournful cries and more like soft giggles, barely audible, yet undeniably present. Doors would creak open, not with a sudden bang, but with a gentle, deliberate sigh, inviting them further into the house's mysteries. The family felt Alara's presence constantly, a quiet, mournful energy that enveloped them, yet no longer filled them with abject terror. It was a persistent, almost palpable feeling, like a shadow at the edge of their vision, a soft breath on their necks. They were no longer merely haunted, they were accompanied. Alara was no longer just a figure in a photograph. She was an undeniable living presence within their home, a silent companion in their quest, her subtle actions a testament to her growing connection with the family who finally sought to understand her. The house, once a silent tomb for a forgotten tragedy, was slowly, subtly coming alive with the quiet, hopeful energy of a child finally being heard. The search continued, driven by a growing sense of urgency and a strange, profound connection to the spirit they were trying to help. The relentless search for the hidden room had consumed the Miller family for days, transforming their once joyful exploration into a tense, almost frantic excavation. Every creak, every tap on a wall was met with desperate hope. Tom, his skepticism replaced by grim determination, methodically prodded along the bookshelves in the old study, the room Sarah's grandmother once used. He ran his hands over dusty spines, feeling for any incongruity, any faint seam in the wood paneling that might betray a hidden space. The children, sensing the mission's gravity, moved through the house with solemn quietness, occasionally pointing to a loose floorboard or askew wallpaper. The air hummed with unbearable tension, a silent conversation between the living and the spectral, all focused on uncovering a truth buried for decades. It was late one evening, the house steeped in an oppressive silence when Tom's hand grazed an ornate section of a built-in bookshelf. His fingers brushed a carving, and with a soft, almost imperceptible click, a narrow strip of wood shifted inwards. His heart leaped. He pressed harder, and a 3-foot section of the bookshelf swung inward with a faint groan, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A rush of cold, stagnant air, heavy with dust and ancient wood, spilled into the study. Sarah, hearing the sound from the living room, rushed in, her breath catching as she saw the gaping maw of the hidden passage. Her eyes met Tom's, a shared mixture of dread and profound anticipation. This was it, Alara's room. Summoning courage, Tom retrieved a flashlight and cautiously stepped through the narrow opening, Sarah close behind him. The beam cut through thick darkness, revealing a small, forgotten chamber no bigger than a walk-in closet. The air was heavy, not just with dust, but with a palpable sense of sadness and longing, a profound stillness. It was a time capsule of a child's world, frozen in amber. A faded rag doll lay propped against worn picture books, its button eyes mournful. Nearby, vibrant crayon drawings were tacked to the wooden wall, depicting whimsical creatures and a solitary figure. A miniature wooden box, intricately carved, sat on a makeshift table, hinting at cherished secrets. Sarah's gaze found a small, leather-bound book tucked beneath the rag doll. Its plain cover and worn edges spoke of frequent handling. With trembling hands she picked it up, brushing away dust. It was a diary, Alara's diary. The brittle pages were filled with a child's looping script, each entry a window into a life tragically cut short. Sarah sat on the dusty floor, oblivious to the grime, and began to read, her voice a hushed whisper in the heavy silence as Tom's flashlight beam swept the poignant room. Early entries filled the diary with a lonely child's innocent musings. Alara wrote of imaginary friends, stories for her dolls, and her profound love for this secret hideaway, where she felt safe and unseen, away from her parents' often indifferent world. She described watching squirrels from a tiny window, dreaming of flying and sketching the whimsical figures on the walls. Her words painted a sensitive, imaginative soul craving connection, finding solace in her hidden sanctuary. The diary was a testament to a vibrant inner life, a child yearning to be seen, yet consistently overlooked. As Sarah turned the pages, her heart ached with dread. The tone shifted dramatically. Whimsical dreams gave way to fear, then desperation. "They left," one entry read, words scrawled unevenly. "They forgot me. I called and called, no one heard." Another, barely legible, spoke of hunger and terrifying thirst, of suffocating darkness, and the chilling realization that the door was locked from the outside. The last entry was a desperate plea, a tiny, incoherent whisper of a child's terror, a fading hope for rescue. "Mama, Papa, please, I'm scared. I want to go home." The truth, stark and brutal, slammed into Sarah. Alara hadn't just died tragically, she had been accidentally, cruelly locked in her secret room by her parents, who had gone on a trip, forgetting her entirely. She died a slow, agonizing death from dehydration and fear, alone in her refuge. The vague newspaper clippings of an unfortunate accident now made horrifying sense. Her family, perhaps out of shame or grief, had buried the true circumstances, leaving Alara's spirit to linger, trapped by her forgotten tragedy. A profound sorrow washed over Sarah, a grief so intense it felt like the child's pain had become her own. Tom, his face pale, leaned against the doorframe, a silent witness. The pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. Alara's anguished gaze in the family photograph was not malevolent, not an accusation, but a desperate, silent plea. It was her spirit's last, most potent attempt to be seen, to reveal her tragic end, and finally break free from the suffocating silence of the crushing weight of Alara's story, meticulously laid bare in her faded diary, settled upon the Miller family like a shroud. The raw, unfiltered truth of her accidental abandonment and agonizing death within the very walls they now inhabited was a revelation that tore at the fabric of their understanding. Sarah, who had pursued this grim history with a relentless determination, found herself utterly overwhelmed by a sorrow so profound it eclipsed her previous fear. Her heart ached not just for Alara, but for the universal tragedy of a child forgotten, a life extinguished by a simple, horrific oversight. The image of little Alara trapped and alone, her small hands scratching at an unyielding door, haunted Sarah's waking thoughts and invaded her restless sleep. Her desire to help Alara's spirit, to offer the peace that had been so cruelly denied in life, became an almost physical ache, a new urgent purpose that consumed her. Tom, the pragmatist, was equally undone. The logical barriers he had so carefully constructed had long since crumbled, but this final, heartbreaking piece of the puzzle cemented a deep, almost paternal sense of responsibility within him. He felt a searing guilt, not for any action of his own, but for the collective indifference of the past. For the decades Alara's suffering had gone unrecognized. The weight of her forgotten existence pressed down on him, and he knew with an undeniable certainty that they could not simply walk away, moving. Once his most fervent suggestion now felt like a betrayal. They were the ones who had unearthed her truth. They were the ones now bound to her silent plea. The family, united by the shared burden of knowledge, looked at each other with a silent understanding, their eyes reflecting a collective resolve. They knew, without needing to voice it, that they must help Alara find peace, that her restless spirit was tethered to this house, to the unacknowledged truth of her death, and that their plan must involve more than just empathy. It demanded action, a profound act of recognition and remembrance. Their first step was to acknowledge Alara's presence, not as a source of terror, but as a lost soul yearning for solace. They returned to the hidden room no longer with apprehension, but with a newfound reverence. Carefully, gently, they gathered Alara's scattered belongings. The worn dolls with their vacant stares, the crude, heartfelt drawings depicting a lonely world, the miniature wooden box containing forgotten trinkets. Each item was handled with a tenderness that spoke volumes of their shared grief and respect. They decided to create a small temporary memorial within the house, a sacred space where Alara's memory could finally reside. On a small antique table in a quiet corner of the study, they arranged her treasures, placing the diary prominently, a testament to her voice finally heard. They spoke to Alara softly at first, then with growing confidence, their voices filled with genuine sorrow and compassion. Sarah explained to the unseen presence how sorry they were for what had happened, how they understood her pain, and how they wished for her to find rest. Tom added his voice, a deep, comforting rumble, assuring her that she was no longer alone, no longer forgotten. Lily and Ethan, though young, understood the gravity of the situation, their small hands gently touching the dolls, whispering their own innocent words of comfort. As they began this deliberate process of acknowledgement and mourning, a subtle yet profound shift occurred within the house. The oppressive chill that had permeated certain rooms began to recede, replaced by a more neutral, almost comfortable temperature. The sharp, mournful whispers that had once echoed through the corridors softened, transforming into something far less menacing. They were no longer cries of anguish, but rather like the gentle sigh of a passing breeze, a faint, almost imperceptible rustle that hinted at a quiet presence, rather than a tormented one. The cold spots, while still present, felt less intense, more like a gentle coolness than an icy grip. Even the child's gaze in the family photo on the mantelpiece seemed to undergo a subtle transformation. The unnerving intensity, the accusatory stare that had haunted them for weeks, softened. The eyes still held a lingering sadness, a hint of past pain, but they no longer felt demanding or trapped. Instead, there was a faint, almost imperceptible softening, a glimmer of something akin to relief, or perhaps simply a quiet observation. It was as if Alara's spirit, having finally been seen and heard, was beginning to unfurl its tightly wound anguish, allowing a fragile sense of peace to seep into its ethereal being. Sarah and Tom knew this was just the beginning. Alara deserved more than just whispered apologies and a makeshift memorial. She deserved a proper farewell, a symbolic funeral to honor her memory and formally release her spirit from its earthly tether. They decided to hold a small private ceremony, not with religious dogma, but with heartfelt intention. They involved Lily and Ethan in every step, explaining the importance of compassion, of understanding for those who are lost, and the power of remembrance. Sarah helped Lily choose a small white flower to lay beside Alara's diary, explaining that it symbolized purity and new beginnings, even in memory. Tom guided Ethan in carefully cleaning a small, dusty window in the hidden room, explaining that they were making a clear path for Alara to finally see the light. It was a delicate balance, explaining the concept of a restless spirit to young children without instilling fear, but rather fostering empathy. They spoke of Alara not as a ghost, but as a very sad girl who needed their kindness, a child who had suffered a great injustice and deserved to be remembered with love. The entire family was committed to this act of healing for Alara and for themselves. They understood that by helping Alara find her peace, they too would find theirs, finally transforming their house of haunting into a true home. The day of Alara's memorial ceremony arrived, a quiet reverence settling over the Miller household, distinctly different from the dread that had once clung to its walls. The hidden room, a dusty tomb of forgotten memories, had been transformed. Sarah, with Lily's eager help, meticulously cleaned every surface. Tom installed a soft lamp, casting a warm glow that chased away shadows, illuminating faded drawings and worn floorboards. A single pristine white rose, chosen by Lily, rested beside Alara's small diary on a makeshift altar. Ethan, with a solemn intensity, polished the small window, ensuring morning light could stream in, a beacon for a spirit long lost. As the family gathered in the intimate space, a profound silence enveloped them. Sarah held Alara's diary, its fragile pages a testament to a life tragically cut short. Her hands trembled as she opened it, the weight of Alara's untold story pressing upon her. She began to read, her voice soft at first, then gaining strength, filling the room with the forgotten fears and dreams of a child yearning to be seen. She read of Alara's imaginary friends, her delight in sunbeams, her longing for her parents' attention, and then the chilling shift to growing panic, desperate pleas to be found, to be let out. Each word was a raw, unfiltered glimpse into Alara's final, agonizing days, a narrative of loneliness and terror that brought tears to Sarah's eyes, blurring the faded ink. A wave of profound emotion washed over the entire family. Lily, her small face etched with sorrow, buried herself into Tom's side, quiet sobs racking her tiny frame. Ethan, usually boisterous, stood perfectly still, a single tear tracing his cheek, his young mind grappling with Alara's suffering. Tom felt a lump in his throat, an ache in his chest for the child they now knew not as a haunting presence, but as a victim of cruel fate. The atmosphere in the room intensified not with fear, but with a powerful, tangible sadness, a collective grief transcending time, uniting the living with the memory of the lost. They weren't just reading a diary, they were experiencing Alara's final moments, giving voice to her silent screams. As Sarah reached the last fragmented entries, her voice thick with emotion, she paused, her breath catching. The final words, scrawled with a desperate hand, spoke of fading hope and a wish to be remembered. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with grief. It was then, as Sarah gently closed the diary, that it happened. A gentle, cool breeze, impossibly soft, swept through the room, stirring the white rose and rustling the pages. Even though the window was shut, the lamp flickered once, then steadied. In the corner, near the sunbeam, a faint, almost transparent silhouette began to form. It was small, childlike, unmistakably Alara. Barely there, a shimmering outline of light and shadow, yet her presence was undeniable. She looked at the family, her ethereal eyes conveying not fear or accusation, but profound peace, a gentle gratitude that brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. A faint, imperceptible smile graced her translucent face, a quiet acknowledgement of their compassion. The silhouette lingered for only a few precious seconds, a silent farewell, a final, beautiful manifestation of a spirit unburdened. Then, as gently as she had appeared, Alara slowly faded, dissolving back into light and shadow, leaving only the lingering scent of old paper and fresh roses. With her departure, the oppressive sadness that had permeated the house for decades lifted. It was a gradual, subtle release, like melting ice. A feeling of lightness and warmth replaced the lingering chill, a serene calm that filled the hidden room and spread throughout the house. The air felt cleaner, brighter, imbued with quiet joy. The family stood together hand in hand, tears still streaming, but now they were tears of relief, understanding, profound peace. They knew, with unwavering certainty, that Alara's spirit had finally found rest, released from its earthly tether, free to move on. With a collective sigh of quiet contentment, the Millers slowly emerged from the hidden room, their hearts lighter, their spirits renewed. They returned to the living room, drawn instinctively to the mantelpiece where the family photo still stood. The vibrant colors still popped, the smiles still radiated warmth, but something fundamental had changed. They looked at the spot where Alara had once stood, a haunting presence. The child's figure was still visible, a faint, ethereal outline, a permanent echo of her past suffering, but her gaze was no longer fixed or haunting, no longer laden with tragedy. Instead, her eyes, once filled with desperate plea, now held a serene light. A faint, imperceptible smile graced her lips, and her head tilted slightly as if looking forward towards a brighter future, no longer trapped by the past but embraced by remembrance. The photo, once a source of terror, had become a testament to empathy, a poignant reminder of a life found and a spirit set free. The house, once a prison for a lost soul, was now truly their home, a sanctuary of peace and understanding. The silence that settled upon the Miller household after Alara's departure was unlike any they had known before. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of dread, nor the tense quiet of anticipation. Instead, it was a profound, almost sacred stillness, a quietude imbued with the lingering warmth of a soul finally at peace. The strange occurrences that had plagued their lives for weeks had ceased entirely. No more phantom whispers, no more inexplicable chills, no more objects subtly shifting in the periphery of their vision. The house, once a source of unsettling mystery, now felt simply like a home. It breathed with a different rhythm, one of comfort and quiet history, rather than a restless, mournful past. The fear that had tightened its grip around Sarah's heart, that had made Tom wary in his own hallways, and that had seeped into the children's innocent dreams had completely dissipated, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. They no longer tiptoed through the corridors or glanced nervously over their shoulders. Instead, they moved with a newfound lightness, their steps echoing not with trepidation, but with a quiet confidence. The weight had lifted, and with it, the burden of a forgotten tragedy. This peace was not born of forgetting, but of a deep and profound understanding. The Miller family had faced the unknown, walked through the shadows of a past sorrow, and emerged not unscathed, but undeniably stronger and more connected. They had learned that their inherited home was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a vessel of stories, a keeper of memories, some joyful, some heartbreaking. Their initial desire to flee the unsettling presence had transformed into an unwavering commitment to honor it. They chose to stay, not out of obligation, but out of a newfound love for the very walls that had once harbored so much anguish. The idea of leaving, once a desperate escape route, now felt like a betrayal of the peace they had helped Alara find. This house was now truly theirs, not just in ownership, but in spirit, a place where the echoes of the past had been respectfully laid to rest. Alara's hidden room, once a dusty testament to a forgotten tragedy, underwent a beautiful transformation. It was no longer a place of sorrow, but a quiet sanctuary. Sarah, with her meticulous touch, cleaned and aired the space, letting sunlight stream through the small, newly cleaned window. The old, worn bookshelf remained, now holding not just forgotten tomes, but also a collection of cherished family photos, interspersed with a few books on local history and children's fables. The small wooden box where Alara's diary had rested was now a permanent fixture on a small antique side table, its surface polished to a gentle sheen. Beside it, a single small, framed photograph of Alara, taken from the faded drawing Sarah had found, stood as a silent guardian. Her eyes in the photo were no longer filled with the haunting plea, but with a gentle, almost knowing smile, a testament to the peace she had finally achieved. This room became a quiet reading nook for the entire family, a place for contemplation, for quiet moments, and for remembering the little girl who had taught them so much about empathy and connection. The original family photo, the one that had started their entire journey, remained on the mantelpiece in the living room. Its presence was no longer a source of dread, but a gentle reminder of the extraordinary events they had lived through. When they looked at the corner where Alara had once been a ghostly figure, her image was still there, a faint, almost ethereal impression. But her gaze, once so piercing and accusatory, was now soft, almost benign. She appeared to be looking forward, not trapped in the past, but as if gazing towards a peaceful future. The photograph had become a symbol of their journey, a visual representation of how understanding and compassion could transform fear into acceptance. It was a constant, subtle testament to the truth they had uncovered and the healing they had facilitated. The house, imbued with this new understanding, became a haven, a place where the past was respected and the present was lived with a deeper appreciation for the unseen connections that bind us all. The Miller's story, though deeply personal, resonated with a universal truth, the power of empathy. It was a journey that began with a chilling mystery and culminated in a profound lesson about the human spirit, or perhaps the spiritual echoes of a human life. Sarah, Tom, Lily, and Ethan had learned that some mysteries aren't meant to be feared but understood and ultimately healed. They discovered that listening to the whispers of the past, even when those whispers were unsettling, could lead to a deeper connection with the present. Their experience transformed their perception of home, turning it from a mere dwelling into a living entity rich with history and the lingering essence of those who had come before. They had not just inherited a house, they had inherited a legacy of untold stories, and through their courage and compassion, they had given one of those stories its rightful, peaceful conclusion. It was a testament to the idea that love, in its broadest sense, possessed the power to transcend even the boundaries of life and death, bringing resolution to the most restless of souls. Their experience became a quiet cornerstone of their family's values, teaching Lily and Ethan about kindness, the importance of acknowledging others' pain, and the enduring strength found in facing difficult truths. The Miller family's journey served as a poignant reminder that every home, every place we inhabit, holds echoes of the past. Sometimes those echoes are joyful and vibrant, and sometimes they are tinged with sorrow and unfinished business, but always they are there, waiting to be heard. And sometimes all it takes is a compassionate heart, an open mind, and the willingness to listen to those subtle whispers to bring peace to restless souls, transforming a place of haunting into a sanctuary of memory and peace. The Millers had not only saved Alara, they had, in a profound way, saved themselves, finding a deeper meaning in their lives and their home. Thank you for watching this story. If you were moved by the Miller family's journey, please like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more compelling narratives. We'll see you in the next video.